In this series, we're going to discuss our harness acceleration work, going through the march, the bound, and specifically the sprint. When we think and reference back to the wall drills, the wall allowed us to hold that nice strong 45-degree angle. Now we're going to progress and introduce the harness, which also allows us to hold that good strong 45-degree angle, which is indicative of those first 3 to 5 steps we typically see in acceleration, whether it be track or that initial burst on the field. Now, a couple unique things about the harness. Number one, people typically think of it as a resistive tool. And yes, we are using it for resistance, but why we're using it for resistance is a little bit different than most people give it credit. The number one reason we're utilizing the harness is to unload body weight, allowing the athlete to hold that good strong 45-degree angle. Thereby, holding their body weight up, it means that they don't have to put as much vertical force in the ground, allowing them to direct their force better backwards, optimizing that horizontal force direction. And referencing back to the presentation, we know when it comes to acceleration, it is not just about the magnitude of the force, but also the direction of force. So the harness allows an athlete, especially a younger or a weaker type athlete, to start to understand what it feels like to direct their force backwards. Allowing them to get that feeling then allows us to progress them to the sled work, a bit more resistance, inevitably to the free sprints themselves. To start off, we want to give you a detailed understanding of how to successfully set up your harness drills, making sure not only the athlete, but the person holding the athlete is in the correct position. The first thing we want to notice is the person holding the athlete, because that's number one for safety. So Natalie, who's going to be our holder right now, is going to get in a good, strong base position. Almost imagine as if she's water skiing. From this position, she's going to keep this rope nice and tight. You also want to notice that she keeps her hands slightly down. That down position reminds the athlete that they should be obtaining a 45-degree angle. From there, then, what do we notice? From head to heel, strong as steel. So JP is in that same strong, long position as we saw in our pillar marching. From here, that belt buckle is pushed forward, and that chest is driving up into that harness. Again, that harness gives the look and the feel of what acceleration position should be like, making it easier for the athlete to adopt it. Once the athlete is in this position, and our holder's in a good, strong, comfortable position, we can start then progressing into our march, our bound, and our sprint. We're now going to have JP and Natalie reset so we can start going through our march. In this first movement, we're going to go through our harness march. We're going to have Natalie and JP set up. When we look at the angle of JP, he doesn't have to be at that severe 45 degrees, but we want that angle to be distinct so he starts getting the feeling of driving that force horizontally back. On my first go, we're going to start seeing a nice light march in place, parallel to what we saw in the pillar march. And on my second go, he'll put a little bit more force in the ground as he moves forward 10 yards. Notice from a technique standpoint, head to heel stays nice and long, knee is driving up to that 90-degree position, trigger is up, working through that piston action, no cycling at all. Okay, nice and light in place, and go, and forward, go. Bit more force back, push, 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 hammer, hammer, and relax. Couple things that you want to notice as your athletes are going through this. So as JP and Natalie walk back, a couple major things that we're looking for. Number one, we want to see that angle stay distinct and locked in the entire time. Therefore, we should not see the body pitch forward. We should not see the body pitch back. It should be silent the entire time. From there then, as we've talked about, arms and legs should move violently around the body. Body should not move around the arms and legs. If we were to draw a plumb line down from the middle of JP's hips, we want to see that his foot is either striking that plumb line or slightly behind. Again, referencing back to our presentation, we know the first 3 steps during acceleration, the person actually strikes behind their center of mass. This is reinforcing that we're optimizing the magnitude and the direction of force, all the reason why we start with a harness march. On our next progression now, we want to increase the actual force that JP has to put into the ground. And now we're going to go into a bound. With a bound, one thing that you'll notice is not only does he put more force in the ground, but he also allows a bit more flight time. And that flight time then forces him to be able to hold those postures, be patient if you would, and then re-accelerate back into the ground. Why is a bound beneficial? Well, at the end of the day, the first 5 steps that an athlete takes with initial acceleration are the longest steps in terms of ground contact times. Every subsequent step after 5 gets shorter and shorter and shorter. The bound reinstills in the athletes that they're maximizing the force and the time they have on the ground and not being overly quick. Especially in field sport athletes, you see them try to come out and take 1,000 steps when they only needed to take 10. The bound starts to instill the right mechanics from a ground contact time and a ground force perspective. Okay? On my go call, we're going to start with a march to set the tone, and on my second go, you'll see that force increase as JP goes into a bound. Okay? Marching forward on go, go. Good, and bounding, go. Punch, 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 and relax. The most distinct thing you notice about the bound is JP spends a bit more time in the air. The reason he spends a bit more time in the air is because he's putting a little bit more vertical force in the ground. In fact, that is a good thing, because at the end of the day, to be successful at acceleration, you first have to own your body weight. Only then, after you own your body weight, can you own the horizontal force behind you to actually project your body forward. So by increasing the total force, he not only improves his ability to handle his body weight, but also his ability to optimize that horizontal force back. The athlete should almost imagine they're posing for a picture midair as they're driving forward through that bound. On this last progression now, we want to take it up a notch and go through our actual sprint. So I'll have JP and Natalie walk on back. Great job, guys. Okay, let's go and set up right here. Now, one thing I want you to notice about the last progression that is incredibly important. I always have the athlete re-engage with the march. The reason I have him re-engage with the march is to break inertia, get a rhythm going, and then instill the more difficult progression. So we're going to do the same thing now. You'll hear me yell march, bound, and then he'll run off frame. And that run now should be similar to the bound, but now he's optimizing the frequency more similar to if he was actually sprinting on the field of play, whether he's closing a gap or coming down on a defensive type opponent. Okay, nice and strong, good lean. Marching forward, go. Bound, go. And sprint, go. Push, 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 and relax. Major thing with the sprint, number one, you see he spends a little bit less time in the air, which means he's optimizing that horizontal force back. Absolutely what we want to see. What you shouldn't see is a change in the mechanics. His body is still leaning, he's still pistoning with arms and legs, everything else is tied in. And the last thing that comes on board is a bit more frequency. Even after the start, we see that contact times from an actual frequency perspective are 4 times a second. So from that bound, we should see a distinct increase in the leg frequency. But if you put them on high-speed video, they shouldn't be going so fast that they're not actually completing the motion. So as long as they're completing that piston-like action, we want that frequency to be as high as it can, up to 4 to 5 contacts a second, especially with the resisted harness. Over those 3 progressions, you're optimizing posture, you're teaching direction and magnitude of force, setting your athlete up successfully to do free sprints and our sled work. That is exactly how we want to perform our acceleration, harness march, bound, and sprint. In this next series, we're going to discuss our sled, march, bound, and sprint. Now, fundamentally, everything we're going to have JP go through is the same as our harness version of these drills, but a couple nuances that we need to bring to light. Number one, he is wearing a belt over a harness. We will never do our sled work with a harness simply because the belt allows him to control and own his posture. The other major reason is the actual angle down to the sled in a harness is going to cause it to jump up and down, where that's not going to happen if you actually have someone holding it. Therefore, anytime we're actually doing sled work, it is always going to be belt-based. The other major thing that we can use with the sled is up the load. If you look at recent research papers, they have shown that you can probably take the load based on your surface up to about 30 to 50% of body weight. So if we are on a high friction surface, we might use a lot less. But this is a low friction surface, so we'll be able to notice we have a fairly high relative ratio of JP's body weight. Now, in looking at this, we want to be careful using too much weight. If we consistently do a lot of sled work with heavy weight, it, yes, gets JP comfortable at being at an angle, yes, gets him comfortable at putting a massive horizontal force. But what happens when I take him out of the sled? What happens when I take that 50% of body weight away? Now, he doesn't know how to accept body weight. He doesn't know how to accept that vertical force. Therefore, we see athletes get over-rotated, and they tend to almost fall or go swimming, if you would. So we want to make sure that from a volume perspective, we respect what we talked about in the presentation, using our sled work in concert with our free sprints. Therefore, we get the most out of it, load, horizontal force, but we don't do it so much that we change the pattern to the fact that they can't effectively run free sprints. Remember, we're always trying to get the athlete better at running free sprints within the context of their sport demands. Let's kick it off with our acceleration march utilizing the sled. Okay, nice and strong, feet under the body. Good, strong lean. Again, approaching about 50 degrees. On my go, nice and light in place, then moving forward. March, go. Punch and forward, go. Good. Nice, strong angle. Punching back, a little more snap out the back. Punch, 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 and relax. Again, look at the similarities of what we have seen. JP is keeping his body at a good, strong angle the entire time. He's pistoning around that body. He's working as if he's in a tunnel. That's a cue we oftentimes use. Imagine you're on train tracks, don't get derailed. Head to hip is very, very calm. One of the major things we know that separates elite versus sub-elite sprinters and athletes in general on field sports is their head movement, or said another way, lack thereof. We should not see that head bouncing around. They should lock in that position as they hammer back the entire time. Now, we want to have JP go in the bound for the same exact reasons as we did with the harness. He's going to generate a bit more vertical force. That's going to allow him to put more total force in the ground, carrying over better to the actual free sprints. Now, when you do bounding in sleds, based on the length of the actual tether, you'll notice that the sled actually bounces a bit. That bouncing of the sled reinforces the fact that, yes, he's putting a bit more vertical force in the ground. But when we reference back to the mechanics of acceleration from the presentation, we know how critical being able to generate vertical relative to body weight and horizontal force is, hence the reason bounding is so critical to our acceleration phase of sprinting. On my first go, he's going to march, break inertia, get the sled moving. Second go, we'll see the bound. Okay, nice and strong march here, and go. Pushing back and bounding, go. Good separation, snap, 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 and relax. As JP goes through that, one thing we're looking for are those legs are not going side to side. They're staying nice and centered. We can do a version of a 45-degree bound. We tend to do that with hockey, but when we're working on field sports, we want to keep everything straight ahead. The best cue for the athlete is, imagine in air, they're trying to pause just for an instant to get that photo op, right? That reinforces that direction of force, lifts them up, they hold, violently exchange, arms and legs moving around the body. With the cueing, we really want to use push-oriented cueing. Drive back, snap off the ground, explosively push the ground back as hard as you can, minimizing any body reference cueing. On this last progression now, we want to take it up our final notch and introduce the sprint. I cannot stress enough how important it is that we first march, bound, and then sprint. With that kind of weight behind him, we don't want him to bust through that inertia with that initial push out of the gates. He has to get it going nice and easy, and then we up the gas, right? Nice and strong here, march in place, and go. Taking it forward, and bounding, go, and sprint, go. Punch, 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 and relax. One of the best ways to know that both in the sled and the harness that you're seeing effective running is film it. Get a high-speed camera or a normal speed camera, slow it down. As long as the athlete is achieving almost full extension of that back leg, they can leave about 10 degrees on the table, that's fine, but as long as they're almost achieving full extension and that front knee is getting about 80 degrees, you know that they're maximizing the movement. Therefore, even though it looks ultra fast when they're running with the sled, you know that they're actually getting everything out of their mechanics. Never forgetting that 3 to 5 contacts a second is what we see typically in that first 10 to 20 yards. Once your athlete has mastered the wall, they're able to accept body weight, generate horizontal force utilizing that harness, then we're ready to up that load, up that postural demand, and overall technical demand, introducing the sled. That's exactly how we want to perform our acceleration sled, march, bound, and sprint.